They say you never stop worrying about your kids no matter how old they are. And parents have the challenge of raising these kids into teenagers and that emotional roller coaster that comes with it. But more and more parents are facing the reality of substance abuse among teenagers. Dr. Behrooz Bernous explains. We are back with one of my favorite people, Dr. Bernous, helping us navigate and understand our children right now. I think a lot of us can agree, whether you have an infant, a toddler, a child that's 6, 7, or 8, or even a teenager, we're dealing with all sorts of issues right now, just with having them home, let alone the challenges that just come with parenting. Thank you for being back here, Dr. Bernous.
Hi, Charlie. My pleasure. It's good to be back.
We have talked over the past few weeks and months about kids, and I could talk to you for days and years. I am fascinated. Every time we speak, there is a good amount of information I take back with me, and I say, oh my gosh, that's what he was talking about. This is what's happening, and I see shifts in my own behavior, and I see the results of it. Towards the end, I have 4 kids. I am dealing with toddler all the way up into, I'm getting into the adolescence age, and I'm dealing with all sorts of challenges. One of the things I am most concerned about is drug use and substance use. I never got into it myself, if I may be completely honest, never tried it in my life. I know that there's people around me very close that in teenage years, I saw them and I saw their lives just go in a direction that I would have never expected. And now that I have my own children, and I know that there's parents who are listening or watching right now that they're either in it, or you look at your baby and you wonder, could this ever be my child in the future? What do we do? Is there anything that we can do now if your kids are young enough to prevent it? And we'll continue the conversation of what if you have a child that's in it?
Right. Wonderful questions. And before we can even start talking about what do we do if our teenagers develop substance use or abuse problem, which generally, if they have already developed the problem, you definitely do need professional help. We need to talk about why they may gravitate towards substances. By substances, just to make it easier from now on, I'm including alcohol and all sorts of drugs, whether prescription drugs or illicit drugs. Marijuana included, even though marijuana is a legal drug. So we're talking about all of them, but we just limited to substance use and abuse. Before we do that, let me just, again, do a quick recap of what we talked about in the last podcast, and that was about parenting a teenager, parenting an adolescent, and what happens to them, what goes through their heads, and why now today we can talk about they may, some of them at least, go and get into drugs and alcohol. Remember I said that perhaps the most difficult phase of human development is adolescence, right? It's a very stormy time. It's a very difficult time because even though they start earlier, like at age 2 or 3, to begin to have a sense of self, their sense of self begins to solidify when they become an adolescent. But they go through a lot of back and forth and confusion about who they are, what they're about, what their goals are, where they're headed, what they should be doing, and what do they expect from themselves and parents and the society and culture. We talked about that. Now imagine what it's like for a 15 or 16-year-old to go through that, not to mention the hormonal changes, right? The desire to be with another person, okay? Romantically, emotionally, sexually, and so forth. So what the task of an adolescent, in my opinion, is to develop a clear sense of self, to know who he or she is. Optimally, that's what happens. They develop a sense of who they are. You've seen some teenagers who tell you that, I know I'm going to grow up to become a pilot. I want to be a nurse. I want to become a medical doctor. And they do become. They do. And I've seen them. That they do go and get into pre-med, they get into engineering school, they go to law school. So they do develop these expectations. They do set these goals. And fortunately, some of them do follow through and they get there, but not all of them. They also need to become, and I know this may sound strange to you and your viewers or listeners, they do need to become kind of somewhat self-absorbed. You've seen that teenagers act very selfish, very
Yes.
self-absorbed. It's all about me. They act as if they don't care about anybody else, including mom and dad or the world. This type of self-absorption or this form of narcissism is not necessarily unhealthy.
Really?
Right. We're not talking about pathological narcissism or unhealthy level of selfishness. Okay, no, we're talking about them investing in themselves to protect themselves and to begin to develop even a touch of sense of grandiosity. See, we've talked about this. Like, for example, a touch of anxiety is not bad at all. It drives us forward. A touch of suspiciousness or paranoia is not bad. It protects us, right? We kind of look where we're at, where we park our car, and so forth and so on. So a little bit of grandiosity among teenagers is not bad abnormal. Why? Because they think they know it all and they can do it all. This sense of grandiosity allows them to believe in themselves that they can do it. Even though it may not be completely true, they still do need mom and dad. They do come ask for money. They do come ask for this or that. But to believe that during that phase is not abnormal, because they gradually and progressively will become disillusioned that no, they can't do it all. No, they do not know it all. And they do need the help of their teachers or a friend to talk to or mom and dad for all kinds of reasons. So we don't need to kind of burst their bubbles so quickly as soon as they act arrogant or know it all. Again, understand, empathize, tolerate, kind of, and help them through it. So they need that. So they need this to be able to develop a sense of kind of strong sense of self. They need to be able to mourn, to grieve and let go of that symbiotic relationship they had with mom and dad, to constantly be with them and let them take care of me. They have to let that go if they're going to become independent. So that requires some form of grieving and mourning. Okay, that's another task a teenager is faced with. And finally, they allow themselves to go through the confusion about their sexual identity and eventually come out having a clear sense of who they are, whether they are heterosexual, homosexual, or whatever, right? Religious or not. Am I a Democrat or a Republican? Whatever, okay? So this is under favorable circumstances, meaning that if everything reasonably goes well, they do come out of this very difficult, challenging time. They do go to universities, they do go seek a profession, and then they will become healthy adults, which we talked about. It takes two reasonably healthy people to have a healthy relationship in a marriage. So you can see that they're all coming together, all our paths, they're all interrelated. Now, we're talking about substance abuse problem. Why? How do our kids or teenagers get into drugs and alcohol? There are different theories about substance use and abuse problem. Let me quickly go over the medical or biological reasons. We do know that these substances that are out there, from alcohol, which is a legal drug, right?
Yes.
Marijuana, that these days is a legal drug, to prescription medications or to other substances. They all are chemicals and they do affect us. They affect the brain. More specifically, they affect neurotransmitters in our nervous system. Okay? So that's why we develop dependency on them, either physical dependency or psychological and physical dependency. And I'll quickly go over them and explain what I mean. So it doesn't matter whether your teenager accidentally is introduced to a substance or a drug, or does it on his or her own for recreational purposes, or for a reason that I'm going to talk about, have to self-medicate. Once these substances enter their system, they take over. They're no longer in charge, okay? Even though some of them don't create physical dependence, such as cocaine, they do create emotional and psychological dependence. That's why they're so difficult to give up. That's why they're even so difficult to be treated. Professionals, most professionals in mental health shy away from dealing with and working with people with substance abuse problems. But now, why teenagers gravitate towards these substances? Okay, so as I said, whether they are introduced to this substance, alcohol, a beer, marijuana, which is unfortunately is almost everywhere these days, or more hardcore drugs, once they're introduced and they try it, like you said, you remember your friends who did try them, maybe once or twice, then they stopped, or some who continue to use and they're still doing it, right? The point is, they remember the person who tries it, let's say a teenager, tries marijuana or alcohol. Let's go with the mild ones, not so hardcore ones.
Mm-hmm.
They remember how it affects them physically and mentally. This gets registered in their memory bank, right? So they may not have to use it again for months and years, right? Now, there comes a time this teenager is about to go to a university, is accepted to UCLA or to UCI, is about to start med school, right? And is very anxious, very stressed out, knows that I have a lot of work ahead of me. So he or she's getting stressed out. Guess what happens? Suddenly, in the back of his or her mind, remembers that, aha, I do remember when I drank one beer or I took one puff of that marijuana, it really calmed me down. Guess what they're going to do? They're going to go try that.
Mm.
Now, which ones do that? The ones who don't have access to healthier means of dealing with this stress associated with going to medical school. Healthy relationships, friendships, recreational activities, athletic activities, art, music, and so forth. Okay? Or maybe counseling or therapy. They're the one who now want to go have a drink or smoke marijuana. So there is a biological reason why any one of us, including teenagers, gravitate towards substances, okay? Because it does work. And let me quickly mention classified drugs that are out there, so at least we know what we're talking about, because I'm going to refer to them in a few minutes. Generally speaking, we kind of classify drugs and substances out there to three groups. One is called downers. Those are the ones that help an individual feel calm, like alcohol, like marijuana, like sedatives, like anti-anxieties. They calm you down. And we have learned that people do not like their drug of choice by accident. For example, what I mean is a person who is anxious, a teenager who is highly anxious and nervous, most likely would gravitate towards downers, would like the effect of alcohol, would like the effect of marijuana, or if he has had access to or tried anti-anxieties and sedatives, will gravitate towards that because it calms him down or calms her down, okay? If you have a teenager who tends to be somewhat depressed, sluggish, afraid to go out there, suffers from low self-esteem, right? And is confused, he or she may gravitate towards what we call now the other class of drugs, uppers or stimulants, like cocaine, speed, things that would kind of help you, kind of lift you up.
Right.
So someone with low self-esteem or anxiety and fear of going out there or suffering from lack of energy, most likely will use one of these uppers or stimulants. Okay, and the third one, we call them mind-altering drugs like PCP and acid, or these are hallucinogenics. And for a different reason, teenagers may gravitate toward that. So we already talked about the biological reasons why teenagers gravitate towards these drugs. But then the other reasons are more psychological. For example, what do I mean? So it would be connected to what they've talked about. We've seen that teenagers who have, for one reason or another, failed to take in the good parent, or what we call the good object, they fail to take in a soothing, comforting, loving, caring parent's image, or parent imago, as Jung called it, in them. Remember that when a mother is soothing her child, is comforting the child when the child is anxious, sad, or frustrated, the child is not only comforted at that time, the child is also learning how to soothe himself or herself. Remembers how mommy calmed me down and comforted me. when I was frustrated, when I came home with a bad grade. So a child or a teenager who has had that experience, now faced with a stressful situation, doesn't need to go use drugs. But if that child or that teenager hasn't had that experience, okay, now has to rely on a substance to help him calm down or to help lift him up. Especially a teenager who's conflicted about now I'm 18 or 17 or 19. It's embarrassing to go to my mom and dad to talk to them. They won't understand. I like to show that I'm able to do the things I want to do. I don't want to go rely on them, because if I do, then I lose my autonomy. Guess what? They go rely on this substance. And we also talked about, just a few minutes ago, we talked about toys and other things that are used as transitional object. In other words, it helps the child tolerate the absence of parents. Drugs become, unfortunately, that's another theory, a transitional object for teenagers and adolescents. In other words, in their mind, it helps them get through these difficult phases of life. See, a little boy or girl would rely on a toy until mommy's back, right? So I won't be too scared that I've lost my mom, or mommy no longer loves me, or daddy is really mad at me and doesn't want to talk to me. My toy will keep me busy, and I play with this toy until they're back, and then I'm reassured that no, they don't hate me, they're still here, they love me. So teenagers who are faced with all kinds of tasks, if they don't have access to these healthy means, what they do, they rely on these substances. The problem is, they have this illusion that this drug makes me feel independent, right? If it's marijuana or alcohol, it calms me down. If it's Xanax, it calms me down. So I still feel independent. I don't need to call mom, I'm sad, I'm lonely at my dorm, right? I moved out, but I feel like coming back home. It's embarrassing to them. So in order not to do that, they rely on the substance, who is short-lived, only lasts for a few hours. But worse than that, unfortunately, now it has created a dependency. And that's what we call addicted, whether psychologically addicted or physically or both, to this substance. So not only it hasn't helped me with my anxiety, my dependency conflict, my fear of going out there and facing challenges of the world. Now, on top of that, I have an addiction. Okay? So now I have two big problems to deal with. Okay, so I hope it makes sense. And I'm going to pause for a second, see if you have any questions, see if these theories make sense. So the psychological reasons or emotional reasons why kids or teenagers, not kids as much these days, but teenagers gravitate towards these substances.
When you're talking about this, because we've addressed this issue so many times just in the past few months on the news, that there's so much rise in substance abuse, not only with, I got to imagine, with teenagers, but even adults, because of all this anxiety and uncertainty and stress, and there's financial stress, and what are we going to do? People are losing their jobs, and people turn to these type of substances to be able to cope. Well, the whole time that you're talking, I'm like, what do I do now? What can I do now with these young kids? Because I know the stress is there waiting for them. They're going to deal with the colleges and the broken hearts and then the bad friends and then all this stuff. And I see their four little faces, Arshaya, Arshan, Shyla, and Shaden. And I want to know, what can I do now? What do I say now to be successful then?
In other words, how do you prevent it?
Yes. How do you prevent it? And then, Dr. Bernous, is it always preventable? Because I know that there are great families. I know that there are parents who adore their children and they love their kids, and they, intact families. There were no divorces, and their children, are in jail, or they're in trouble, or they're addicted to something. So how do you not know that will happen even in a healthy situation?
I'll try to answer every aspect of your question, because you included quite a few things in it. How do you prevent it? Before I do that, let me say last psychological theory behind substance use and abuse problem is the inability to tolerate affects. what does that mean? It's a little bit technical, meaning that those groups of people who are unable to tolerate their own emotions or their emotional experiences, they tend to gravitate towards drugs. And remember, we talked about different classes of drugs.
Mm.
So some people, teenagers or adults, use drugs as a form of self-medication. So if I am depressed and I have seen how cocaine affects me, I will go use cocaine to lift me up so I won't feel depressed. If I'm highly anxious, I'll smoke marijuana, I'll drink to calm me down, right? This is because I haven't learned other ways of dealing with these emotions that are very natural, okay? We all get sad, we all get anxious, we all get scared or feel insecure or worried about a job interview. But not all of us run to drugs and alcohol, right? So you're saying how to prevent it. Actually, that's a great question because it takes us back to what we talked about in parenting, 1 and 2. Remember we said that one of the primary tasks of a mother, more so than a father, but both, is to be a good container. What do I mean? To be able to tolerate, contain your child's emotions. Now we're talking about adolescence. To remember we said, understand, expect, empathize, and tolerate. When you can do these things, when you can tolerate the ups and downs of their moods, and you don't react too strongly or overreact, you don't get mad and get into verbal, God forbid, physical fights with them. You calmly, hopefully, are able to understand and walk them through it. Talk about it. They develop the capacity to tolerate their own emotions. So what you can do from now on is when your son comes home frustrated because he was supposed to get an A, but he got a B+.
Okay.
Or somebody at school bullied him, or somebody took away his candy, or whatever, right?
Okay.
And he's frustrated, he's angry, he's sad, all kinds of feelings. First thing you don't do is be dismissive, okay? Or you don't try to cover it up and try to distract them. Hey, don't worry about it. Let's go and play outside with your brother. You're being dismissive. You're not allowing him to express his feelings, anger, sadness, frustration, whatever. And you remember we said one of the tasks of a parent is to make this world understandable, to introduce this world to the child in a digestible manner and in small doses. Okay. This is now when you say, how do I prevent my child to develop substance abuse problem or minimize the possibility, because you can, like you said, you can do your best and have a wonderful family and they still can develop drug abuse because not everything is under your control. You cannot control everything. And you need to know that every parent needs to remember that, because otherwise you may get into blaming yourself, even though you did everything right by the book and your child ended up not going to school, to a university, or become a doctor or an engineer, or God forbid, develop substance abuse problems. And you say, where did I fail? What did I do wrong? Probably nothing, okay? Because it's not all about us. It's not all about you. You don't have 100% control. But yes, there are things you can do. So we are not powerless. There are things you can do to reduce the likelihood of your child developing substance use or abuse problem when he or she becomes a teenager or even an adult. So by tolerating, understanding their feelings, helping them sort it out, talk about it. So if your son comes home sad, you hold him in your arms, let him cry. If he's angry, you let him vent out, okay? And then you say, hey, do you want to talk about it? So what did really happen at school? And then when he says this, well, yeah, I would have been angry if I were you too. That is very frustrating. This is very frustrating when someone takes away something that belongs to you without even asking you. Honey, I have no problem with you being angry. What do you think we should do about it? And you don't immediately offer an answer. Well, we'll go talk tomorrow to the principal, right? But that may actually embarrass him, right? Time to cover all of this, but you said, what do you like to do? What do you think we should do? I don't know, Mom. I'm just mad. I want to go punch him tomorrow. Yeah, I can see that too. I can see that you're so angry and angry enough that you would like to punch him. And so let me see, what would happen if you do punch him? I know I'll get into trouble with the principal, then I'm going to get suspended. So, okay, so I guess punching is out of the picture. What else can we do? You see what I mean? If we do these things, if we take the time when he's sad, No, 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 I don't want you to be sad. Let me cheer you up. Let me tickle you. Let me do whatever. No, let them stay with their sadness, because this is how they develop the ability and the capacity, or what I said, to tolerate different emotions. We can't be always happy, smile and laugh and be giggling. There are times we are sad, appropriately so. We are angry. It's again what we do with this feeling. So to answer your question now more specifically and directly, how do I prevent it from happening? I don't know about complete prevention, but if you do these things, you will be among those parents that are fortunate that their children or their teenagers, or when they become young adults, do not develop. They may go even experiment, but no, this is not for me. I don't think this is good for me, right? And they will use other means, like those of us who don't use drugs and or don't abuse alcohol, are able to do that because somehow our parents did a good job. Genetically, we were equipped with, okay, and maybe our society and culture did support us in not going towards drugs and alcohol. Why am I now emphasizing society and culture? Because sadly enough, nowadays, almost in every society, with some small exceptions, alcohol has become such an acceptable and social thing that no matter where you go, almost, the first thing they do, they offer you
A drink.
When you go to a restaurant, the first thing they ask you, what can I get you to drink? When you go to somebody's house, what would you like to drink? Beer, wine, whatever. I'm not criticizing that. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but it has become such a big part of our life and our culture. And it's so readily available. And it's because it's legal. Those who have not developed these abilities to tolerate their emotions, to learn how to deal with conflicts and stressful situations, they will abuse alcohol, because otherwise you and I know people who socially drink and have no problem with it. Mm-hmm. They may have a glass of wine every night with their meal. It's not a problem. Or they may drink 2 or 3 times a week. But then we do see people who drink to get drunk. They have to finish the bottle. They lose their jobs because of it. They get arrested because they get a DUI. Okay? So we're not talking about the normal use of alcohol. Okay? I don't want to send out the wrong message that everybody who drinks is sick. No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying those of us who have developed these healthy means of coping with challenges and stressful things in life, we may drink and we don't abuse it. So our teenagers who are not as well equipped as adults are, unfortunately, once they're introduced to these substances, they would rely on them, they use them as crutches to deal with life, not knowing that not only it's not helping me, it's actually preventing me from growing up. And once I wake up, I realize I haven't achieved my goals, and on top of it, I have an addiction. I hope I answered your question.
Yes, you did absolutely answer your question. If there is a family parent who is watching or listening right now, and they do have an adolescent who they may suspect or already know that they do rely on these substances to get through life, what would your advice be to them? Is it fixable? Is it just too late? What do you do at that point?
Good question. Let me go with the second element. Is it fixable? Sadly enough, as I said, most mental health professionals shy away from, or they are reluctant or reluctantly accept to work with someone who has substance abuse problem, because they know that so long as this substance, whether it's alcohol or drugs, is in the person's system, they're ineffective. Okay? So is it fixable? Yes, but it's a lot of work. Because first thing is to stop the use of that substance, right? So whether it's alcohol or drug, it needs to be stopped. So having said that, if their teenager is heavily involved into a substance or alcohol, they have to seek professional help. They need not to wait and think that they can handle it on their own until the problem gets bigger, okay? So they need to seek professional help. However, they can be, and they are very instrumental themselves. That's why if you go to any psychiatric program or treatment facilities, or you go to AA or NAs, they always have separate group meetings for parents. They have Al-Anons, and if you go to hospitals, they have family meetings, because parents need to be there as the support system. Because now that if let's say you detox this teenager from the substance or from alcohol, now they have to have a place to go to. They have to have a support system. Parents will take them back and help them to get back on their feet, but they need more than that. They need more than detox. They need more than just the love and support of the parents to help them get back on their feet. They now need either psychological, psychiatric, or both help. In other words, they may suffer from a mood disorder. They may be depressed or highly anxious, and they're self-medicating, as we said. So they may need to be placed on the right medications. And that's where you need a psychiatrist, especially a psychiatrist who specializes in substance abuse treatment, okay? But then you also need a psychologist or any other mental health professional, because it's not just a chemical thing. Now, even if they're detox and they physically no longer crave the alcohol or the drug, as we said, they're now emotionally dependent, addicted to that drug. So how do I get rid of my psychological dependence? And it goes back to what we talked about, all kinds of things that are happening inside me. One last thing. You said, what about those parents who have done everything? They had an intact family, they have a loving family, and they still end up with this. It's because it's not just the parents. Remember, we said at one point or another in one of our previous podcasts, we are biopsychosocial beings.
Yeah.
Right? We are biologically, psychologically, and socially made. So you may need to use all three dimensions to help someone with drug and alcohol problem, right? See whether they have a good support system, a group of friends and activities, whether there is a chemical imbalance in them, they have a mood disorder or something, that's all. It needs medical and or psychiatric attention. And we're psychological beings, so we may need to rely on a psychologist, a therapist, to help them sort out things and work through things so they can let go of the drugs, because otherwise you see that they keep going back to it. They go in and out of programs and they keep slipping, relapsing back to the substance, and parents are frustrated, spend a lot of money, and they feel powerless. So it's a difficult thing to treat, but it's not impossible. So is it fixable? Yes, not an easy process. So it's better, like you said, to prevent it. So those parents who are listening to us and they have young, small kids, they're not teenagers yet, they probably have a good chance of minimizing that chance by perhaps following through with some of the recommendations we have made here.
My mom always told me it is so hard to raise children. And I think I understand, and I get it now. And I'm so appreciative. Like, I'm going to hold these, I'm going to make my own how to raise a human binder. I'm going to keep putting all my little notes in here and be like, all right, 3-year-old, this is what we're going to do.
Page 3 and for chapter 2.
But you know what? I do believe if we put the work in now, and we arm ourselves with information, we do the very, very, very best that we can, we have a better shot than if we didn't do this at all. So absolutely. I am so appreciative of you giving us the information and having these very difficult conversations that I think some parents don't even want to talk about. We just want to pretend that everything is okay and they're just going to grow up and everything's going to be perfect. But it's real and it's tough. And with the right guidance and the right information, I think we got a shot at this. I mean, I got 4 to go through, Dr. Bernous.
Great, and I know you love them, you care for them, and you take the time to learn about these things. Again, your chances are as good as most parents who really put in the effort in raising their children into healthy beings, healthy adults.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate this. You make me want to go hug and kiss my kids right now. And I'm going to start telling them, you know what, Mommy doesn't want you to be my baby forever. Go. Mommy's always here for you. I'm changing my language because of you. Dr. Behrooz, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure. As always, good to be with you, and have a good day.
You too.
You've been listening to It Is What It Is with Shali Zomarodi. You can join in and ask your questions live on Shali's Facebook or Instagram page. You can find so much more by following Shali on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and by visiting shalz.com.